Hey everybody, I want to share something with you today about breakups and the Beatles. The Beatles are, of course, one of my favorite areas of study, and they tell us so much because we have all of their history so well documented. But I want to look at the breakup of the Beatles and show you some things in their charts about what was going on, and this can help you sort of get a sense about when turbulent times might show up in your own relationships and when turning points might be reached in our own lives. So, yeah, we'll take a look at some charts here and show you what's going on. For those of you who don't know the exact details, what happened was at the very end, John Lennon decided that he'd had enough. He reached a momentous decision point in September of 1969. Um, and funnily enough, his manager said, "Don't tell the other guys yet." And so the rest of the guys didn't hear about it for about 8 more days after that. So let's start by looking at John Lennon's chart and show you what shows up in our charts when we're faced with a major crisis point in our lives. And that's exactly what happened with him. You see here, this is his birth chart, which is, fine and interesting. You may or may not understand it entirely, but what I want to show you here is his progressed chart. And you see how in the first chart, there's all these lines, there's a whole bunch of information there. But in the progressed chart, we're narrowing it down to only those things that are exactly to the degree or so from exact, so that so because that's how progressions work. There are turning points in our lives, there are major developments in our lives. And so as you can clearly see from this chart, he's got a huge half square going on. We call this a T square in astrology. It's an opposition between Mercury and Uranus, and then both of them are being squared by the moon. In other words, the moon is halfway between Uranus and Mercury. And what's important to note about this is that the progressions only come around once in a lifetime. So this exact opposition, you can see, I could see if I put on my glasses, that Mercury had progressed to 24 degrees of Scorpio, and Uranus had progressed to 24 degrees of Taurus, an exact square. And so, excuse me, an exact opposition. And so Mercury has been moving through the chart at a certain pace. And it took basically, how old was he? 29 years to get to that point where it was exactly opposite Uranus. That all by itself indicates a place in your life where you're ready for a change. You're ready to, you have a sense of perhaps imprisonment that you want to be set free from, right? Of course, Lennon felt like the band was limiting to him. And what makes this even more critical is the fact that the moon moved to this position exactly halfway between them at the same time. That's uncanny. The moon moves about 1 degree every month. Mercury moves roughly almost a degree every year. So it's like the perfect storm. It took the timing of this planet, the moon, moving fast, and this planet, Mercury, moving slow, for them to both reach that point at this exact same time. It's just really unpredictable, you would say, but not unpredictable, but without astrology, you're not going to be able to predict or call this, but you can see it coming with astrology. So you can see when these developments are coming in your own life. So anyway, Lennon gets to this critical point in his life and makes the decision. Um, and then he actually doesn't tell the guys for 8 days later. So now I want to jump over to Paul McCartney. And this is Paul McCartney's chart. Okay, somewhat interesting. I want you to take note of the ascendant, 25 degrees of Virgo. The ascendant is the most important thing in our charts. If you haven't heard that yet, um, and you've been fooling around with moon signs and sun signs, those are valuable information. But the rising sign is the most critical point on everyone's chart. It's the starting point for the chart. So we have his ascendant, 25 Virgo, right there. And then this is what was happening in the sky that day. And what I'm going to show you is a combination of his birth chart and what was happening in the sky that day. And so you see that 25 Virgo, that's his most important point in his chart, and his chart is represented in the inner ring. The transits, the planets where they were exactly or actually on that very day are represented in this outer circle. And you see that Pluto was exactly at 25 Virgo. This is the god of death, transformation, and rebirth. And when that planet hits this critical spot on your chart, this is a place where you metaphorically die. The identity you had, the sense of self that you had, the place in the world that you thought you knew who you were, all of that gets taken down into the underworld, god of the underworld, right? Pluto. It resurfaces later, but if anyone's lived through Pluto crossing your ascendant, as I have, you know exactly what this is, what I'm talking about here. It's not fun. It can be traumatic. People can die. In fact, what happened to me was that when I was 10 years old, we moved from one part of town all the way across town, Houston town, big old town. So basically, all those friends that I had in my old neighborhood died metaphorically because I never saw them again. We didn't have cell phones and social media, and our parents weren't slaves to driving us all over the place at our whim. So those people were just gone from my life. So Pluto crossing your ascendant is really rough stuff. And of course, for Paul McCartney, it was like having the rug pulled out from under his feet. It's like, wow, we just finished making the best album we ever made, Abbey Road, if you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, listen to Abbey Road. It's a work of absolute artistic and songwriting and performance genius. And but nope, there's no more Beatles. We're done. It's all over. So he was experiencing that um, at that moment in time. And then I want to look at George next, and this is another interesting astrological phenomenon. We look at George's chart now, and we see there's his chart right there. 28 Libra is his rising sign. And when we look at the progressions for George on this day, we see the moon just about to enter his 12th house. The 12th house is the house of solitude. Now I want to see if I can, actually, I am going to show you the chart here because this is the combination chart. It hadn't just entered his 12th house, excuse me. It had been in his 12th house for quite like 2 years or so. It's just about to cross that line of the starting point, but it's still here. So when the moon is in this part of your chart by progression, it is when you are sort of hidden or waiting for the next big thing to come up. And I say hidden. There, some of your latent abilities maybe won't be coming through till the next cycle begins. Which in this case, like I said, the moon moves about a degree a month, and so he's about 7 degrees or 7 months away from a whole new beginning. So what happens with George in this period of time is he's still kind of kicking around. I mean, he is actually starting to play with some other people, but he's still kicking around the Beatles scene. They hadn't finished recording, mixing, or wrapping up the Let It Be album, which they had recorded before Abbey Road. They just kind of walked away from it because it just didn't feel right. But they're polishing it up. They're doing a few extra bits here and there for several months after Abbey Road. And so George is still like, okay, I'm still doing the Beatle thing, you know. Uh, but what happens on April the 10th of 1970 is that Paul uh, goes, he gets pretty mad at at the rest of them and decides he's gonna not have anything to do with them anymore. And on that day, again, we're going forward 6 or 7 months. For George, you see the moon has now progressed into his first house. It's crossed that line. You see, there's the month, couple months before, and then boom, at that point in time, it's like, oh, okay. So I'm going to get busy with my solo projects, which of course he did. But he was still wrapping up old business until he crossed that point. You might find yourself wrapping up old business when the moon progresses to that point in your chart. This happens about every 30 years, so you'll experience this once, twice, maybe three times in your life. Yeah, it's good to know if you're feeling like something big is coming, but you're not quite ready. It might be that you have your moon progressed into your 12th house. So there's George, and last but certainly not least, Ringo. There's Ringo's chart, and what's really interesting about Ringo's chart, his ascendant, we're back to the ascendant, which I always say is the most important thing. His ascendant is 25 degrees Pisces, which is, of course, exactly opposite Paul's ascendant at 25 Virgo. And something you should know, especially if you're in a romantic relationship or if you're looking for one, if you get really lucky, the strongest attraction there is the attraction of opposites. And when your ascendant is opposite that other person's ascendant, that is some really, really bonding going on there. So you can have experienced that romantically, or in this case, friendship, co-working. Ringo and Paul had and still have, of course, that very close attraction, which can also manifest as repulsion, right? It's like opposites attract, but they're opposite. They're very, very different. And so every romantic couple has experienced the attraction and then like, oh, get away from me. You have to manage that. On this particular day in in back to where are we? April 10th, the John and George actually elected Ringo to go over and deliver a letter. I don't know if you remember or even know what letters are, but people used to write information on paper. And that's the only option you had back in 1970. So they wrote a letter and they asked Ringo to hand deliver it to Paul. And apparently Paul told Ringo to get the fuck out of his house. So again, there's that attraction that can flip to repulsion, that you have to be really careful when you're managing your oppositions. If you have an opposition between, say, your moons, between and you and your lover, or your suns, you and your lover, or your moon and their sun. There's the attraction that of like, wow, this person's different, but there's also you have to be wary of the repulsion factor that can show up. So that showed up for Paul and Ringo on that very day. But then the other interesting thing, because you remember that for Paul, the Pluto was on his ascendant, the most important point. Well, for Ringo, Pluto was on his descendant, the opposite point. So, of course, this has a lot to do with the ascendant, but the particular way that it shows up, because it's the descendant, is how you show up in relation to other people. And so for Ringo, he basically transformed from being the guy in the background to being the guy in the foreground, right? The drummer always sits behind the guitar players, right? He's in the back. Well, when you're a solo performer and your name is on the cover of the album, you're in the foreground. So a massive transformation for Ringo. So I hope you can see that this this breakup and your breakups and your challenging times in your relationships are going to be mirrored in your charts, and it's like the confluence of several factors depending on how many people are involved. There's you and your lover, or in the case of a group setting like the Beatles, there's all four of them had something really profound going on that is reflected in the activities and the actions that they took. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. I like to do stuff on the Beatles because I love the Beatles and everyone's heard about them, and their stories are so they're larger than life, right? So but yeah, you can pull this back down to your level. Even if you're not a superstar, we still all go through these same challenging periods in life. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and feel free to check out the other videos. I'm going to be doing some more videos here. I've got an Instagram account. Sometimes I post stuff there. New series of reels I got planned coming up very soon. So check me out on Instagram. Everything is Chakraology. Facebook is /Chakraology. Instagram is @Chakraology. And yeah, and let me know if you need a reading. If you're having some trouble in your relationship, I actually do readings, couples counseling, astrological counseling. So you can see exactly what you're up against, because all these things that I just showed you and all these different charts, they're all temporary. They don't last forever. But it's when both partners are reaching a critical point at the same time, that's when you need a little perspective to help you get through if that's what you're choosing to do. So yeah, the Beatles, of course, did not have me on hand to guide them. Otherwise, they might have just said, let's take a year off and we'll come back and make some more music. But be that as it may, life unfolded as it did. But I can help you navigate through your challenges. Just give me a shout, and yeah, see you next time.